Let's hop over to the Leafs. We talked about a sad topic in the Coyotes. Talking about another sad topic for a different reason now. Leafs, I don't know why. Somehow they're in a divisional playoff spot, but we all know if we've been watching that they're not playing like a team with cup ambitions right now. I think something you noticed, particularly we wanted to start off with, was Sheldon Keefe, because he's been a little more fiery, let's say, in post game press conferences, and just anytime he has access to a microphone, he's taking shots, it seems like.
Yeah.
And I mean, I honestly, I don't really hate it, but let's see what you think first.
Well, I think the word I would use to describe Sheldon Keefe is vocal, like you said. I mean, after the loss to Arizona, and granted, I was at that game. Big thank you to my uncle for providing me with those tickets. We had a good time. That was the worst game I've ever seen the Toronto Maple Leafs play, and we could talk a lot about whether that hand pass at the end of the game or the penalty cost me. At the end of the day, they didn't show up for 3 periods. Sheldon Keefe was perfectly within his rights to be upset at the Toronto Maple Leafs. But right after the game, in the heat of the moment, doesn't give him time to just settle down a little bit. He comes out and says, our best players haven't found a rhythm. Fair, I agree with that. And he goes, the difference between us and Arizona is that we have elite players. First of all, that's so savage to say. Even though it's true, you just don't say that. And then he goes on and says, our elite players didn't play like elite players today, and they couldn't make a difference. See, now the problem I have with this is, isn't this like the 3rd time that Sheldon Keefe has called out his top players in his tenure?
Like, possibly, but they deserve to be called out. They've been awful, except for John Tavares and Nylander. But we know who he's talking about. He's talking about Matthews and Marner.
Mm-hmm.
They've both been really bad. And even though they're putting up just under a point a game, they've been bad.
So I agree. They deserve to be called out.
Yeah.
But just because they deserve to be called out, does that mean you should air them out in the biggest sports media part in all of Canada, or you should keep that internal? Because I don't know a single other coach that has aired out their players. I actually don't know.
I'm sure it's Dallas.
Okay, but that's from upper management.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about coaches here. I can't think of another coach that on a very, and consistent isn't the right word, but he's done it 3 times compared to other coaches I've never seen do it. Just come out in a sports media press conference and just air out his players.
I don't know. It's probably happened. I just don't pay enough attention to the rest of the league. But I don't, honestly, I feel like these guys are a little too protected because they seem too comfortable sometimes.
Okay.
I think you need a kick in the ass a lot of the times too. Like, I love Matthews and I love Marner, but they seem like they get a little too offended when people are calling them out.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, Marner went into the room after and had a discussion, which is fine. You communicate, but at the same time, you're getting paid $23 almost $1 million combined to be the best 2 of the top 10 players in the league, and you haven't been. And we know this is a desperation season for the Leafs, as have the last 3. So if you're not playing well, you can people are going to write about you in the media anyway. They're going to call you out. So for me, I don't mind that the coach does it, because clearly if the coach has been keeping it internal sometimes, it hasn't been working. So I honestly don't have a problem with it. I think there's a balance to strike between keeping things internally, having discussions, and expressing that you're not meeting expectations internally. But I think there's also a point. You got to use the media to your advantage sometimes, and a wake-up call is necessary. And I thought it was appropriate here. Maybe he doesn't do it moving forward because you don't want to keep doing that. But I think every once in a while you need a little wake-up call, and what they've been doing internally obviously hasn't woken them up. So maybe you got to just air them out.
See, my question is, what does airing them out publicly benefit compared to just keeping it internal? And I understand what you're saying. If they've done it enough times internally and it's not working, you try something new.
That's what I'm saying.
But what's the benefit?
Benefit is a little bit of added pressure, a little bit maybe some. Now the pressure's on. People know that the coach thinks you're not good enough, even though you knew that. Now everyone else knows it, and now it's a little maybe light a fire under their butt. Maybe Keefe knows that Matthews tends to get a little fired up when he gets outed in the media. So maybe he's using that to his advantage.
I agree, but he gets outed in the media every day, especially in Toronto. It's one thing in Arizona where not a single camera is kept on that arena, but in Toronto, these players are getting aired out every single day. And I agree, there could be some benefit to airing them out publicly so that there's added pressure. I just wonder that if in this market, the cost of doing so overweighs the benefit. And here's what I mean. Like, the most important attribute for any single coach, we've seen all the best coaches in the league have it. The Sullivans, the Cassies, the John Coopers. Like, the players play for them. They have a control of the room, and they don't lose the room. We saw when teams just change gears, how they change gears after a new coach comes into the room, and the roster is constructed in the exact same way. We saw it, and I mean, it's not coming to fruition this year. Remember last year with the Vancouver Canucks with Bruce Boudreau? A new coach comes in, the players start playing for the coach. There's just camaraderie. There's a different culture. I don't want to be too vague with these words, but there's just something intangible about the team that makes them different. And I wonder if Keefe airing out his players not once, not twice, 3 times now in his tenure, which has only been about 2 years, especially after he hasn't given himself a chance to just calm down or like talk to his players internally before doing this. Like, I wonder if he starts to lose the room. And look, I agree with you. I'm all about accountability for top players, but I don't know if airing them out publicly is the way to keep a room, especially in a desperation season like this. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we're seeing early in the season and in this West Coast swing, like, something's different. These players aren't playing for him.
I don't know if they're not playing for him. This is the Leafs. They never started a season well. Even last year they sucked.
It's true.
It was the same under Babcock. They never started on time. They would never play until they went down in the third period. They never stuck up for each other and set up for each other, except when Wayne Simmons was in the lineup. We saw against the Jets, but yesterday against the Sharks, some bum, Evgeny Svechnikov, was literally cross-checking, slashing Matthews at center ice, and nobody did anything. Like, I think the players bear a lot of the responsibility because it's been 2 coaches now.
I agree.
And 2 coaches who preach a lot of the same things. As much as we want to talk about Babcock being terrible, and he was in certain ways, him and Keefe preach a lot of the same things in terms of starting on time, being accountable, doing all these things that all coaches say. At a certain point, I think the players need to bear responsibility for this.
I agree.
And this is part of it now, because coaches, I think this is a coach's, in my opinion, this is like their last resort. Nothing's working. I gotta go to the media now.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, and I agree. The players should be bearing the brunt of the responsibility because it's clearly not a coaching thing. However, I think when you bear the responsibility, sit Matthews, sit Marner for a period. Don't healthy scratch them, obviously.
They're sitting them is just as bad as this, honestly.
Okay, but the difference is now you let the media air them out. It's not the coach. The coach is airing them out in a way that is like socially acceptable to the players in the culture of hockey. Versus now, when Matthews plays a terrible game, he hasn't scored in 7 games. The first thing he does when he opens Twitter is he goes, the head coach is saying he's not good enough. And he knows it. Sheldon Keefe comes into the dressing room at the end of the game and airs them out. And he's got to do it in public too.
Exactly.
I wonder if these players start going like, man, I don't want to use the word screw, but like, screw this guy. Like, he's talking all this crap to us, and now he's talking out there. Like, I wonder at what point he loses the room. And I agree. This, in a perfect world, these players should be professional enough to understand that they deserve this scrutiny. But like, this is reality.
They might not be. I think that's a fault of theirs too. I think both parties are to blame. I'm just frustrated now. I think if this was this time last year and Keefe did this, I'd probably say, hey, easy. But right now, I have no sort of mercy. Mercy's not the right word, but I don't feel bad for these players anymore.
I agree. When I think of the best coaches, like the most respected coaches in the league that just have a history of players playing for, like Daryl Sutter is the one that comes to mind mostly. Like, would you agree he's a players type of coach? Like, has he ever lost a room? I can't remember.
I don't remember, no. Right,
and the reason why I bring up this argument is because last year, playing for when they played the Edmonton Oilers in that conference, not the conference finals, the one before, the Calgary Flames just weren't good enough. I remember Markstrom was terrible. Lindholm, Gaudreau, Tkachuk were terrible as well. Daryl Sutter got asked continually about these players, and we're all sitting there, we're all listening. Like, we all know Daryl Sutter wants to say, these guys aren't good enough. But what does he say? He goes, maybe our players are doing the best that they can, and we're just running into the best player of all time. Does he believe that? Probably not.
No.
But what benefit at that time, in a time of desperation, to saying, no, Lindholm's garbage, Markstrom's garbage? Like, what does that do?
No. Nothing. Nothing. It doesn't do anything productive. Also, Calgary was really good that season and really consistent. And the Leafs are the opposite right now.
That's fair. I guess there's a lot of things that come into play here. I wonder if, and so the reason why we bring up this conversation about Sheldon Keefe is there's starting to be tweets. A lot of like NHL fans and even analysts are starting to talk about it. Like, not Sheldon Keefe is going to get fired, but is Sheldon Keefe now on the hot seat? maybe a portion of him thinks that he is, which is why he's getting desperate. I don't know. Do you think he is? If you're Dubas, is he on the hot seat?
If I'm Dubas, if I'm Dubas, he's not on the hot seat because I don't think Dubas would fire him. I think Dubas and him will go down together. If they don't do anything this year, bye to both of them. Maybe even bye to Shanny. Like, who knows? But I don't think Dubas would. I honestly don't think Dubas would fire Keefe just because they're boys and they were in Sault Ste. Marie together. They won the Calder Cup together. I just don't see him doing that. Maybe, I mean, you have to make tough decisions in sports. So maybe it gets to a point if they really can't get a win in these next, like, I don't know, if they are terrible, let's say over the next stretch of 10 games, maybe he has no choice. But I don't see that happening just because of who Dubas is. But if I was the GM, even Keefe I think is like the highest winning percentage in Leafs history as a coach.
Really? Wow.
Something like that. Well, they set the record for points in franchise history last season with him there. Clearly they can play good hockey with him. I don't know if I heard a couple other people talking about this. Is that do these players deserve another coach in terms of like saying the coach was the problem and then giving them another chance? I know it's only been 2 coaches with this same core, but we know it's deeper than just 2 coaches. They've had many opportunities to have success and they haven't been able to do it. I don't think Keefe was the problem against Montreal. I don't think Keefe was the problem. Like when they blew a 3-1 series lead against Montreal, that's all the players. If you can't close that out against literally one of the worst teams we've seen in a long time, that's your fault. Like, I don't care what coaching strategies were used. I don't care what the coach said, didn't say. Like, that's players. So to me, I'm kind of sick of these players not playing every game, and when the pressure gets high, collapsing. And maybe you can bring a different coach in to change that. I don't know. I don't know that well enough, but I don't want to blame a coach for these players anymore.
Yeah, I agree. You know, how many coaches have to come through the dressing room before you start to realize the coach isn't the problem? The issue is the easy answer is the coach is the one that's
way
to go,
easier
right?
to get rid of the coach than to make a trade mid-season.
Exactly. Coaches' salaries don't count to the cap. These players are signed on term, right? You don't want to make any shakeups to the locker room. I think if Sheldon Keefe were to get fired, it would be because the team can't win, and it's because the team needs a shakeup, not because he wasn't good enough to be an NHL coach.
Sometimes you got to do something.
I don't know. I think he is touching coals. I don't think he's on the hot seat, but I think he's making his way there.
Feeling the pressure.
Exactly. He's feeling the pressure. And going back to the comments we just talked about, I just think airing out your players kind of accentuates that process a little bit, because if you don't have your players playing for you, if you start to have players turning on you, when you're not able to win games, there's nothing for you to fall back on when the GM comes to you and says, why should we keep you around?
Yeah, I can see it. I can see the argument for not doing that, especially in a market like this where, like, if things are going tough, the last thing you want to do is not be together. So I definitely get that perspective. I'm also just very upset with this team right now. I'm not thinking logically either. So, and I'm not apologetic for that. So
we don't want you to be sorry. We want you to be bring the anger to the pod.
Bringing the heat, because this team pisses me off.
There's I think there's a couple reasons why fans on Twitter are talking about firing Sheldon Keefe. One, because they're the most delusional fans in sports. Like, we can accept it. Toronto sports fans are the most delusional is not the word. They're like
more delusional fans.
Yeah, they're like on the opposite. They're always on extremes. It's either this team's winning the cup or this team's terrible. You know, sell the team, whatever. It's because Barry Trotz, who stepped away from coaching for the foreseeable future, what we thought in September, now came back. I believe NHL.com verified this quote. He said something like he wants to come back and coach. He wants to coach an original 6 team, and he wants to coach a team that is has a chance to win a cup. And you know, the Leafs do fit all 3 of those.
That's such a slap in the face to Winnipeg.
It is because they are. Oh wait, they're none of those.
They're literally none of those.
Yeah, they're none of those. And I mean, you know, there is a valid argument to saying, even if, you know, if you can look into the future and see Sheldon Keefe has a non-trivial chance of being fired, maybe you do it today while there's a good backup that's available. I mean, Trotz is a very defensive-minded coach. This team is terrible defensively. I'll admit it. I was the first to say that for the last few years, this team was good defensively. Muzzin and Hall were a great second pairing. When Brody came, this team looked good from the first line to the fourth. Like, now, past that first line, defensively, they're terrible.
They suck.
Right? They're really bad. Giordano had a few bad games. He's giving up delay of game penalties left, right, and center. Sandin, you know, he just looks like he's not developing, but he's still a very good player.
He's still good.
Right?
I don't think he can be a second pair.
I agree. Right. This top 6 just isn't good enough to be to be winning a cup. Maybe hiring a defensive-minded coach who wants to play here does that. I mean, does Barry Trotz signaling that he wants to come to a team like Toronto do anything to accentuate the Keefe firing if it were to happen?
Maybe, because if you fire somebody, you better have someone to hire.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know if the Leafs. I don't think the players would enjoy playing under him, but I just flame the players, so I don't really care what they think at this point. But having the thing with I think with Barry Trotz's teams on the island is that he played a very defensive system and only had one borderline star. I think Barzal's a star, but he's not a superstar. The Leafs have two, if not, they have two superstars and like maybe 4 to 5 star players.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So if you're gonna play defense, you're gonna need superstars to carry your offense. I think it is a decent situation for Barry Trotz's team. Like he won the cup in Washington with a similar setup.
Yep.
So he would be a guy that I would be very intrigued to bring in if they had to bring somebody in. I didn't know he was ready to coach again. So maybe now I'm more open to firing Keefe. Not that I wasn't before, but I still don't think it will happen because Dubas is Dubas. But I wouldn't hate it if they came to that.
Right? Like it just seems as if the perfect storm is brewing here. Especially because the coaching carousel has dried up so quickly.
Yeah.
I remember in the offseason, there were so many good coaches available. There was like Paul Maurice. There was Barry Trotz is still available. Peter DeBoer, Bruce Cassidy. Bruce Cassidy is one of my favorite coaches. And you missed all these guys. Can you imagine Barry Trotz gets hired? The Leafs don't win. They lose 7 of their next 10. And now who are you going to bring in? A coach from the Marlies and repeat this process?
Yeah.
I wonder if the lack of supply of coaches comes to mind here and accentuates the process. I don't know.
Me neither. But it's interesting to know that there's somebody out there does exist. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. And find the link to our full podcast and all our socials in the description down below.
Also, don't forget to turn on those notifications to get live updates on new videos that we release.